The key is in the heart. And so Leo energy, more than any other sign, teaches us the wisdom of the heart and teaches us how to tap into that to create a stronger electromagnetic field all the way around us.
Greetings from the Pacific Northwest. You're listening to Symbolic Studies Episode 7. I'm your host Mario, once again joined by my lovely wife Michelle. Today we'll be discussing the symbolism of Leo, the fifth sign of the zodiac. If you're new to the show, I invite special guests to submit a voicemail on the topic at hand and also play voicemails submitted by listeners like yourself. For more information about the show, my services, or how to submit a voicemail, please visit symbolicstudies.com. If you'd like to have access to exclusive content, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/symbolicstudies or on my site. But before we dive into the first voicemail, Michelle, my dear, how are you?
I'm doing wonderful, and I'm happy to be here as always. Also really looking forward to getting into all things Leo.
Beautiful, as am I. Let's listen to the first voicemail from a very special guest, Georgina Rose, aka Dot Darling.
Hello, I'm Georgina Rose. I'm a perennialist and polytheist, and thank you, Symbolic Studies, for having me on this segment. So, when I think of Leo, I think of a very specific sort of archetype within Leo, and that is the archetype of the king, which really is a broad solar archetype. And I think when people think of Leo, they think of a very specific stereotype of Leo when it's discussed, and that is this really big stereotype of an attention seeker, right? Especially people with natal Leo placements, particularly Leo suns and Leo risings, that, Leo placements, they seek attention. They're very charismatic. They're very, they draw a lot of attention to them. And, metaphysically speaking, that's not really exactly how Leo works, because Leo doesn't seek attention. Attention seeks Leo. When I think of Leo, we must understand Leo is ruled by the sun. The sun is a planet of a lot of themes, and one of those is kingship and nobility. And so really, we're thinking of Leo, we have to think of it as solar. We have to think of it as the lion. And the way that I like to explain how Leo works for people is, Leo doesn't seek attention. Attention seeks Leo, right? Leo is like a light, and the world is like a moth sort of flying towards Leo, because Leo is an embodiment of the sun. And when we look up at the sky, where is the sun in the cosmos? The sun is the center. The sun is what is being rotated around, right? The sun has the entire universe in its gravitational pull, right? Everything orbits the sun. And Leo, much like the sun, is sort of orbited by people in the world, people in the life. And when we enter a time right now, right, like this is Leo season. I'm recording this a little before Leo season, but I believe this comes out right at the start of Leo season. What's going to happen is there's going to be big events that we are going to all be drawn to and orbited around. Right now, when I'm recording this, we're in the middle of Mercury retrograde in Leo. And I would say this is the loudest Mercury retrograde I think I've experienced in a very long time in my life and in the life of people around me. Because, those communication issues, those technology issues, that are characteristic of Mercury retrograde. Normally they're kind of inconveniences, but this time they're much bigger because, Leo, that energy, when it's filtered through Mercury, still has that sun quality that pulls, that quality that has a gravity to it, right? There's no way to avoid this Mercury retrograde because of Leo's inherent loudness. And it's not loudness Leo is trying to do, it's loudness Leo has to do. And I want to talk a bit about, the sun as a king. So, there's kind of two planets in astrology that you can argue are father planets, and that would be Saturn, the one that people most talk about as father planets, and then the sun, and they're very different archetypes of the father, right? Saturn is authority, Saturn is control, it's limitation, it's discipline, it's like that stern father figure, which is most exemplified through Capricorn. And then, when we look at the sun, we're seeing this other father archetype, right? This noble father. Hence why king is more often used. Though in modern culture where, most countries do not have kings, and many of the countries that do have kings, they're kind of more, sort of figureheads, right? It feels a bit more like the sun is perhaps a sort of broad father guiding role model type archetype. But regardless, historically, it has been the king. And the sun, another thing, it's the thing we orbit, but it also is the beginning of the days of the week. So the first day of the week is Sunday, and Sunday is obviously ruled by the sun. You can hear it in the name. And so the entire week is actually rooted around the sun. And when it comes to kings and the sun, historically, kings actually would call upon the power of the sun. And antiquity in the ancient worlds, really often kings use the sun to sort of represent themselves, right? They would really embody the sun, they would worship sun gods, right? And, Plato, a philosopher from antiquity, I'm sure you guys are all at least somewhat familiar with Plato. I mean, he was a real pivotal thinker within the esoteric world and within, broader society, honestly. And he had this idea of the philosopher king. And the philosopher king was basically this like complete ideal of what a king could be, right? Like he rules, but he also, is wise and he's anointed kind of by the gods to some extent. And I would say that's kind of like the ideal of a solar man is this Platonic idea of the philosopher king. That's kind of like the highest possible form that a solar person could take upon. And, kings understood this and kings looked up to this, right? Even if they were not, living up to that, they tried to embody that. And in the ancient world, they would do this by calling upon sun gods. The sun god would be used ritualistically in a lot of coronations, right? Like solar imagery would be used, and it would really bring in the king. But, in modern times, the royalty has a bit less power. And not even like even just modern. Further back, like if you look at Versailles, that palace in France, I remember I visited it when I was a young teenager, and I immediately noticed all that sun imagery. And if you look at photos of Versailles, you actually can see a lot of solar energy. A number of French kings actually very intentionally used solar symbolism to represent their nobility and their rulership because the sun is kingship. Now, another thing that kind of goes along with this is the use of royalty and the color gold. So gold is a metal, of course. It's a very highly valuable metal, and it is a solar metal. It is ruled by the sun. It is highly associated with the sun. And gold, it's also a color beyond just a metal. And when we look at, royal color choices, you see, deep blues, deep purples, but you see a lot of gold. And that is because gold calls upon that solar energy. And when people, are doing mystical work and they create talismans to the sun, they use the metal gold, which calls upon nobility and kingship into their lives. And you don't have to be a king to embody this sort of archetype because, we're not talking necessarily too literally, though in some cases we are, but we're talking about this concept of kingship, this concept of rulership, and similar concepts like nobility, right? Virtue. Another thing that's associated with the sun is virtue as a concept, right? And when people go through really intense dark periods of their lives and they're trying to heal themselves, they often do call upon solar powers to reinstill them with virtue. There's a specific ritual called the Stele of the Aeon that's used in Western occultism that is a solar invocation that is used to purify, exorcise, and banish evil spirits and maladies. That is calling upon the sun and noting the sun as the king, as it is said in the text of that ritual, to then heal the self, right? The sun, it embodies the idea of a virtuous, ideal king, right? Not like a literal king that necessarily, because a lot of kings, have done some pretty horrible stuff, right? It's this ideal. It's the Platonic philosopher king. And when we're looking, mystically again, you see the lion, which is the symbolism of Leo, associated with ruling spirits all the time. One that is, described a lot more negatively is the demiurge. So the demiurge is an idea in Gnosticism. It's an idea in Platonic paganism. It's an idea in a number of systems. And demiurgios is Greek for creator. And one of the images, really the only, drawn symbolic image associated with the demiurge is this lion serpent, right? It's a lion head and it's a serpent body. And we know Leo is the lion. There's a direct connection there. And technically in some Gnostic systems, this is a drawing of Yaldabaoth, which is sort of a named archon, king of the archons. And there are some mystic systems that actually don't attribute it exactly to the sun. Some say that it's kind of Saturnian, but one cannot deny the very obvious solar energy and the solar choice of making this image of a creator, and in some of these systems, a flawed creator, an image of the sun. And if you want to get Gnostic about it and say the demiurge is some really evil spirit, and you associate, the demiurge with Saturn, you can argue that it's kind of wearing the skin of the sun. It's wearing the skin of nobility. It's sort of clothing itself in the imagery of the sun. And so when we're entering Leo season, we're entering this season of power, this season of royalty, this season of virtue. And I really challenge you to view Leo not just as an obnoxious, loud time, but as a time of rulership. And, as we're kind of exiting, and we'll fully have exited this on August 11th, this Mercury retrograde in Leo that's been very explosive and intense, notice what exactly is blowing up. Because I sat to think about this with the things in the lives of people around me that are really exploding in this Mercury retrograde in Leo. And one thing I noticed cases, they were things that were, going against solar virtue. And there's a number of solar virtues. There's a number of things that are considered like good solar things. And all of the things I've seen that have blown up are things that are defying solar virtue, right? They're things that Leo and its energy is trying to course correct and fix through this very explosive way. Leo season, it's active, it's intense, it's solar. And, a good thing we can do during it from a mystic perspective is to really work to align ourselves with virtue, to align ourselves with nobility, and to, invoke the sun. I really recommend ritual work that invokes the sun. I recommend planetary remediation of the sun, and this will help with Leo. But yes, understand Leo as a king archetype, not as a loud, obnoxious attention seeker like people in pop astrology spaces like to describe it as. So that's what I have to say. Thank you for Symbolic Studies for letting me do this little segment. I'm Dot Darling. You can find me on the Pagan Perspectives by Georgina Rose podcast, on the Dot Darling YouTube channel, and on many platforms under Dot Darling.
All right, Georgina Rose, thank you so much for that submission. If you guys want to check out her podcast or see what she has going on YouTube, I will leave her links in the description. And obviously, I thought there was a lot of excellent points being made here. Clearly, the relationship with gold and the sun is incredibly strong. In fact, I think it's really interesting that some cultures actually saw gold as the excrement of the sun god. If I'm not mistaken, the Aztecs believed that. So we're dealing with gold nuggets, right? And so you can see how there would be sort of that correspondence. But it makes a lot of sense that gold would be related to the sun and would have this regal nature to it. And obviously, gold is such a well-known precious metal, right? In many ways, it's kind of considered the king of precious metals, even though there are other metals that are more expensive, right? This kind of reminds me a little bit, I just have to say, of Rene Guénon, what he mentioned about gold. And so he says that in traditional golden age times, which is funny, the golden age, right?
Right.
This would be the age when people were balanced and they had this spiritual inclination and they were, what I would say nowadays, vertically inclined, right? That they had a relationship with the divine. That he says in those days, it was a common understanding that nobody can own gold, that gold was unownable, that to think that you could hoard gold for yourself was ridiculous. And there's lots of ideas out there that gold is condensed sunlight, as an example, right? That you're actually containing the rays of the sun within this metal. And so if you were to possess it, it's almost as though you're holding part of the sun, in your hand. And what he goes on to say is that essentially it only was when man started really falling from grace spiritually that they had this idea that you can actually own gold. And now we live in a world where clearly people are just hoarding gold and money and resources and everything else. And to me, this is sort of indicative of this quote unquote dark age, right? And so just the idea of light too. I mean, we could have a whole entire episode on the symbolism of light and how it relates to the sun and everything else. But I just wanted to mention those few bits and pieces about gold right off the bat. Did anything come to mind for you that you wanted to share?
Well, when you bring up the aspect of gold, it makes me think of gold being sought after, and I feel like the sun too is also sought after. After a long winter, almost everyone and all the creatures and the plants, they are looking for the sun. They're waiting for the sun, looking forward to the sun, and we seek it out because for a number of reasons, but it brings us vitality. It's healing. We benefit from it on like a mineral level, all sorts of things. I don't have to list all the benefits of the sun, but that's what comes to mind when you talk about gold and how sought after it actually really is.
Yeah, the sun is absolutely, completely necessary. And really, just to remind people, but the zodiac itself, astrology, it's a solar-based system. Right. Clearly. So we're dealing with the path of the sun. We're dealing with the ecliptic. And so the 12 signs of astrology, or the 13 signs, if you go off of a 13 sign system, it's all because of the path of the sun. And this is kind of interesting as well, because I have an understanding that there was actually a time before solar worship, right? And so there was a time before heliocentrism. And I'm very much interested in what ancient peoples had to say about all of that, right?
Right.
I think it's worth knowing and I think it's worth understanding. But suffice it to say, in today's world, I would consider today's world to really be very solar in nature. I think we were living in a very solar age, actually. And so most people, their cosmology centers around the sun. It hinges around the sun. And when you really dive deep into esoteric solar symbolism, you're going to find that the sun actually has a lot to do with a point of pivot. And so in that way, there's a lot of pole-based symbolism that gets associated with the sun, actually, funny enough. And so there's a lot of ways to look at that, but essentially the pole would be the symbolic pole or axis that sort of bridges the gap between heaven and earth. When you think of a pole, obviously it extends upward and then downward. And so there's this natural sort of symbolic quality to it that suggests that it connects the above and below, right? And also a pole is a point of pivot as well, right? And so that's what the sun represents. It's a point of pivot. And it's a point of pivot for the planets, right? The planets revolve around the sun. And you can see that this pole dynamic actually crosses over in a few interesting ways. I'm going to bring up two quick examples. And they both come from the Rider-Waite deck. The sun card actually shows a child on a horse, and he's holding a very large pole. And there's a flag on it, right? That's not a mistake. Even Gwenon has said that the pole really belongs to the sun in many ways. It also belongs to the pole star. And that's a whole conversation in and of itself about how the pole star Polaris and the sun relate to each other and don't relate to each other. But this point of pivot, it makes sense to talk about it from a polar sort of nature, right? This central point of pivot, this hinge, if you will. And in the Fool card, you'll see that there's a sun in the upper right-hand corner, and the Fool is holding what? He's holding a pole, and the pole is pointing right towards the sun. And so, yes, in heliocentrism, everything revolves around the sun. And it's interesting because this relates to some of what Georgina was saying regarding king symbolism. The king really is a symbolic pole. He's a symbolic axis. That's probably the best word for it, is there's axial symbolism associated with the sun. It being in the middle, it operates as a axis, a point of pivot, right? That's what leaders all represent. I really got into this in my Death in Taurus presentation, where I talk about the Pope essentially being a world axis symbol, right? It makes a lot of sense once you watch the presentation, but that's really what it breaks down to, because every leader is a symbolic point of pivot for their people. It gives you orientation. And so for a lot of people in today's world, the sun gives people that orientation the same way the leader of a household also gives his family a point of pivot, a point of orientation, right? And so that's what kings used to be all about, is that they were a positive point of orientation for people, essentially. And just like what she was saying, too, regarding the philosopher king, they had this understanding that essentially, from everything I've read, good kings had this concept that they connected heaven and earth, not unlike an axis or not unlike a pole as well, which is very, very solar. Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying our discussion on Leo symbolism so far. If you aren't already aware, I have a series called Symbolic Secrets that's only available through my site or via Patreon. At the moment, I'm releasing one episode for every major arcana card and have released 16 so far. That's about 16 hours worth of exclusive content. Links for everything can be found at symbolicstudies.com, or if you want to go straight to Patreon, you can go to patreon.com/symbolicstudies. This is also the perfect way to support the show if you like what you're hearing. All right, back to the episode. She also made a lot of really great points about gold and how nobility likes to use gold, and it's one of their preferred metals, of course. You know, everyone just knows that, even intuitively.
Right.
And so isn't it amazing that the lion is also golden, right? And what's been said as well is that the mane of the lion symbolically represents the rays of the sun. And also, I just have to mention this, it's so fascinating to me how similar the roar of a lion is to the roar of a fire.
Ooh.
Very similar. It's actually pretty bizarre. I've heard lions and they're roaring, and I'm like, wow, that sounds almost exactly like fire. You know, so to me, that's a really cool, interesting correspondence right there.
Well, all this talk of kings makes me think of queens. Because I also can appreciate the fact that some cultures associate the sun with a feminine energy. When I first learned this, I kind of was taken back by it because I'd never heard of it before. But I know in Nordic culture, it is a thing that the sun was actually looked at as a feminine energy. And if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure also in Chinese culture, it is seen that way. And I really can appreciate that because of the point of pivot axis that we talk about with the sun. And that the main creator, where we all come from, in my opinion, is a feminine, and it has to be female. And so she is the divine creator. And that would make a lot of sense to me, being the case of the sun having the importance that it does.
Well, you make a great point, and I've probably said this before in some episode prior, but when you look into the yang, you will always find the yin. And when you really dive into the yin, you will always find the yang. And so the same would be true when you look into queen symbolism, that you're going to find king energy as well, right? And so these two energies are just two sides of the same coin, if you will. And you kind of can't separate them in many ways. As an example, I've said this many times, I'm pretty convinced that the symbolism of the throne actually comes from the queen. Most people today would just see it as just a king sort of thing, but it's actually the queen's throne, or the bridal chair, is the original throne. And to be throned is very receptive as well. And so I see the sun symbolically, just for the most part, being very projective, just like the rays of the sun. And that's what most people are going to think, is that the sun is more projective, the moon is more receptive, projectivity being more masculine, receptivity being more feminine. What I'll say to that is that in traditional symbolism, there's this understanding that there has been a major symbolic shift from polar to solar. And so a lot of people are kind of catching up to this understanding of things. And it's a really deep, profound understanding as well. As an example, the earliest sky clock, from what I've looked into, is actually the fixed stars. And so this is related to what some people have referred to as the stellar tradition. And all of the fixed stars go around the pole star. They all go around the North Star. And so this was the primordial early sky clock. And then at some point, people shifted their focus to the path of the sun, which is what I was saying earlier, is that there was a time before solar worship, right?
Right.
And so a lot of the symbolism that was intact during this polar tradition actually got shifted and adapted to the solar tradition. So if people watch my presentation called The Rising Sun, Esoteric Solar Symbolism, I basically make the case that solar symbolism is actually polar symbolism. That polar symbolism is more fundamental, it's more primordial, it came prior, or it preceded, rather, the solar tradition. And so if people really want to know about esoteric solar symbolism, you have to look at the polar current, and that you're going to find way more information there. So as an example, another example is that you can make the case that kings are actually emulating the original king archetype, which is actually the polar king. And if people want insights into that, they should check out my Emperor card Symbolic Secrets presentation, where I really, really dive into that. And so to me, one of the clearest examples on why this is actually the case and why you know that this is how everything sort of played out is literally we call the sun, right? It's a child. And when you look at the sun card and you look at the strength card is the card associated with Leo. What do these cards have in common? What they have in common is the child. Leo, the lion, in the strength card is literally the child, the symbolic child of the woman in that card. And I've made the case, I think it's really clear actually once it's pointed out to you, that when you're looking at the strength card, you're looking at the relationship between two signs, and that's Virgo and Leo. And Virgo and Leo are right next to each other on the ecliptic. And when you dive into lion symbolism, you find out that the lion has a fondness for virgins. This is clear. And I did a whole presentation called The Lion and the Virgin, where I break that all down and why that's the case. And so they have a clear correspondence with each other. And so when you're dealing with the sun, you're dealing with a younger archetype. You're dealing with more so of a child, which is why, once again, phonetically it's son, just like a boy, a young boy, right? Well, just like the story of the demiurge, one of the demiurges, or perhaps the biggest flaw the demiurge had, was that the demiurge thought that he was the supreme deity. What he didn't realize is that he is subordinate to a higher deity. And that higher deity, to your point, is actually Mother, is Sophia. And so the sun is secondary or subordinate to an original energy. And that original energy is more feminine in nature, and is actually, that energy comes from a more polar place. So really, masculine symbolism, king symbolism, and queen symbolism, when you break it down, another way of saying this would be solar symbolism and lunar symbolism, they came after polar symbolism. So you're going to see polar symbolism with the queen, and you're going to see polar symbolism with the king as well.
Interesting. Well, this kind of validates more of the feminine aspects of the sun, because if these ancient cultures were looking at the sun as feminine and we went from polar to solar at some point, kind of makes sense to me that that would be the case, that they would keep the feminine correspondence on the sun.
Yeah, this is such a huge key. So I really encourage people to watch my Rising Sun presentation about esoteric solar symbolism. This isn't my conclusion, by the way. I just have to say that there are a number of authors who are really well read and researched. They came to this conclusion as well. And if people watch my presentations, they know that generally I discuss something of this nature, right? Polar symbolism. And I'm so passionate about it because it really is very fundamental and it makes a lot of sense. So again, you're dealing with a child on the sun card, and this comes after the moon card, and the moon card comes after the star card. On the star card, you have a woman. She's nude. She's underneath the stars. Symbolically, it's as though she's the mother of that child. Mm-hmm. You know, this represents the polar tradition. That is the North Star in the star card. The moon card afterwards represents a sort of lunar tradition and people paying attention to the lunar calendar and basing things on the lunar cycle. And then afterwards, the youngest of the three, you know, arguably is the sun itself. And that the sun is really more of a modern sort of thing to really attach yourself to. All right, so once again, that was Georgina Rose. That was a fantastic submission. And this whole show, by the way, I'm really trying to highlight other people's voices and other people's opinions. And none of us have to agree with each other. We just have to play nice with each other, you know? But I get a lot out of hearing people's takes on everything. And so hopefully people appreciate my take as well, of course. But moving on, let's get to the next voicemail.
Hi, Mario. Hi, Michelle. I'm excited to share with you about Leo energy. This zodiac sign is particularly interesting because it is ruled by the sun. So all the other signs are ruled by either a planet or, in the case of Cancer, the moon. But the sun is interesting because the sun radiates his own light. And when we're looking at these systems, there's an understanding that the universe is composed of extremely, extremely subtle forms of light and sound. Sometimes this is referred to as the sun beyond the sun. And you'll see that if you study the complementary system of the tarot and the Fool card, where the sun in the Fool card, representative of the sun beyond the sun, is a white sun rather than a yellow sun, indicating its first place in time. So when we're looking at solar energy, we're looking at the highest representation of light that we have physical access to. And I study the zodiac in the body, so I study astro yoga. And when we're looking at Leo energy, it rules over the spine, the heart, the cardiac ganglia, and it relates to the third eye chakra. Now, Cancer, the zodiac sign before this, also relates to the third eye chakra, but Cancer relates more to the pituitary body and the regulation of particular hormones and waters in the body, versus Leo, whose association with the third eye chakra is closer to our understanding of the pineal gland, which is very sensitive to, we find, sunlight energy. So associated with the third eye chakra, but specifically in the body, connected to the heart, the spine, and then this cardiac ganglia, so these nerve clusters which support the functioning of the heart and the connection the heart has to the rest of the body, the impulses, the nerve impulses entering and exiting through that zone. Now, in yoga, they tell us that we receive love, support, nourishment through the back of the heart chakra. And this is exactly where we find the cardiac ganglia in the body. Now, thinking about the heart, I think everybody and their mother knows that the heart is a pump in the body. But there's additional evidence to suggest that more than just a pump, which is significant in itself, it serves as a sort of electromagnetic center. And in fact, when we look at what Leo rules in the body, it is very palpably slightly more positively charged, we could say. The electricity that goes through the spine, the electricity that keeps the heart beating. And this is the center of our auric field that then emanates from that in the toroidal motion, which if you get into Taurus energy, there's a link between these two signs. So when we're looking at Leo energy, we're looking at a sort of electromagnetic radiance in the body. Now this grows more interesting if you think about the four forms of matter that we are most familiar with. So we have earth, of course, solid forms, liquid with water, air with gases, and then we have plasma. Plasma is the state of matter associated with fire, and it's specifically found in the sun. So when we're thinking about plasma, there's a lot that's really interesting there, because this fourth state of matter enters a point where there's a charge to it. This is interestingly what's going on when we see the aurora borealis. This is what's going on with stars. This is also what's going on in fluorescent and neon lights, this kind of ionized gas that is plasma, this sort of reactive entity. So when we're working with Leo energy, we're looking at the state of our own being, which is charged. It creates a magnetic field, and it can help us to attract things toward us and repel other things away from us. There's a reason that Leo energy is associated with what's called the Christ consciousness, not to get religious about it, but the idea that there is a Christos or a soma. All of these words literally mean nectar. And when they're talking about nectar, they're talking about the divine nectar. In yoga, we call it soma or amrit, which descends from the awakened third eye place in the body. And there are those who experience this who literally say they can taste something sweet like honey or nectar. Now, this is all made even more interesting, I think, when you look at the tarot card associated with Leo. So when we're looking at tarot, we have the Strength card associated with Leo. In this card, there is a woman in a notably white dress holding open the mouth of a typically red lion. The woman is wearing a crown of flowers which are blooming and has an infinity sign above her head. I think there's so much in this card, and I know I'm keeping this to under 10 minutes, so I don't want to go on too long about this. But in the secret keys of the zodiac, the fixed signs offer us significant amounts of information. And encoded in this card is the connection between Leo and the sign of Scorpio, who is connected with the snake. Now you see the snake in this card in the repeating infinity sign. There's also a wreath in a figure 8 wrapping around the woman and the lion. And you also see it in the Hebrew letter associated with this card, Tet, which is associated with the serpent, one of 3 Hebrew letters, by the way, associated with the serpent. Now, Scorpio is associated with the serpent and is associated with the Kundalini energy. Here in Leo, in the Strength card, we get a very interesting understanding that Scorpio energy is an energy in its raw form able to create both death and life. So we see the Scorpio energy active in the creation of children and also in the metabolism and death of cells. Now, when we have the Strength card, we see what happens when this is used primarily to promote life. And not just life, but rejuvenation, regeneration, and the perpetuating radiant energy that is shown in the sign of Leo. So the life force, the death force, it doesn't care, right? It is a life force energy, and it moves to both metabolize, which creates more energy for life, and metabolism also creates the death of old structures. In Leo, we see that by befriending ourselves, befriending this very energy, this raw, potent life force energy, that it is through this sign that we are able to connect what is deep within us with what is highest in us. And so we literally take our shadow aspects and we step them into the light. And what the light does is it's not subtle. It doesn't just shine a light on something. It actually acts as fire, and it burns away anything that is no longer meant to be present with us in the future. So the sign of Leo, I could go on and on about this, but it balances out the darkness with the light. It teaches us how to use a force which typically in the body could cause havoc, to use that energy to rejuvenate our form. So it literally teaches the art of rejuvenation and regeneration for those who know how to read it. Now, if people don't know how to read it just yet, the key is in the heart. And so Leo energy, more than any other sign, teaches us the wisdom of the heart and teaches us how to tap into that to create a stronger electromagnetic field all the way around us. I'm about at time. That's about what I wanted to say. There are several other places where you will see a lion in the tarot, for example. Some decks in the Temperance key will show a lion and an eagle. Some won't. They'll show 2 cups, but it is implied. And then, of course, the World card and the Wheel of Fortune. So people curious about looking into that and connecting to their heart, which, by the way, heart is Kora. It's the root of courage. And because Leo rules the backbone, it encourages us to have a backbone and to use that to be ruled by our hearts and not by rulership external to us. There's so much more we could go into. Of course, the opposite sign, Aquarius, rules over the blood. The heart pumps the blood. Aquarius rules the people, who we should also listen to, but in right measure, right? Anyway, this is just the briefest snippet. I could go on, but Leo energy, very beautiful time, very beautiful sign to tap into, to listen to the connection of the heart, and to really learn how to sprout that life force energy, which is the rejuvenating life force. Okay, so much appreciation for you and what you do. I hope you're having a beautiful Leo season.
Okay, Emily Ridout, thank you so much for that submission. You guys might remember her from last episode, and she did such a wonderful job. Really amazing stuff. I wanted to hear her opinion about Leo season, and she delivered. You know, she was talking about the wisdom of the heart, as she put it, and that makes a lot of sense that this would be the conversation for the sign. In case you're not aware, Leo corresponds with the heart, right? And this is so interesting to me as well because she brought up Christ, you know, Christ consciousness, Christ symbolism. And Christ was once referred to, he had many nicknames, right? But the Lion of Judah is one of his nicknames. And when you look at, say, Catholic imagery of Christ, it's not uncommon for him to have a flaming heart, right? And to her point regarding the heart being an electromagnetic center, absolutely. And if people aren't aware of this thread of information, I would suggest Googling "the heart is not a pump." And there are a number of videos and articles and things like that out there. And the main thing is essentially that it's not mechanical the way we've been taught, essentially. And it's exactly what Emily said. It's more toroidal in nature, and it is an electromagnetic organ. Mm-hmm. So as sort of the seat of your spiritual impulse, as it's been argued, this is a profound revelation on multiple levels. So I'm just so glad she brought that to light. And also, too, her correspondence with heart and core and quora and courage, I think it's also really, really beautiful stuff. So, Bub, did you have anything to say?
Yes, I do. And thank you, Emily, because you really inspire so many thoughts in my mind when it comes to astrology, the body, and the correspondences to it. First thing that comes to mind is going back to the heart. And I can't not talk about Leo without talking about motherwort, which is an herb that's associated with Leo, and it's associated with the heart. And the nickname for motherwort is lion's heart. And it is all about regulating the heart, regulating the heartbeat.
Just have to say briefly to cut you off.
Yeah.
The royal star in Leo is Regulus.
Oh, that's a good weave.
You know, so just wanted to put that out there.
That was worth cutting me off, by the way.
Awesome. Happy to hear it.
Yeah, no, that's a great one. I mean, yeah, it's all about regulating the heartbeat. So motherwort can be utilized if you are having heart palpitations, an irregular heartbeat, or even if you are finding yourself in a time where you're feeling anxiety deep within the heart that makes your heart palpitate or makes your heart skip a beat. When you're not feeling like you're in your strongest power, motherwort is great for that as well. So during times of panic or anxiety, deep sadness, we can sometimes fall out of that feeling of inner strength. We sometimes feel like we've lost it, but you've never lost it. Your mind and your heart is elsewhere. So motherwort can actually bring you back to that realization of, I am strong. I can do this, and I can conjure up the courage inside of myself to do the thing that I need to do to move past this feeling of dread or anxiety or whatever it is. So I wanted to throw that in just as a little plant aspect of Leo or for Leo. The other thing that was very interesting to me is the concept of soma that she brought up, and how people mention that when this soma rises in them, they taste something sweet. And what I came across in one of Barbara Walker's books was this quote here. The zodiacal lion encounters the sun in the season of honey.
Ooh.
Now, when I read that, that was my exact response as well. Ooh, that's interesting. And now we're at the point in the summer where the bees have been working very hard gathering pollen and making honey and creating this nectar in the hive. And so when she talked about this sweetness that people associate with the rise of Soma, it totally made me think of that. So there's just another validation towards Leo being the season of sweetness, perhaps.
Yeah, that is so fascinating. And I love that she brought that up as well. And I just have to say that there is a major correspondence with bee symbolism with Virgo. And Virgo, once again, is right next to Leo. And that relationship is really, really deep. And so I've made several videos about this relationship, right? You'll even seen the Dendera Zodiac, which is sort of the most common Egyptian sky map, essentially. And it came later on in the history of Egypt, so it was definitely influenced by the Greeks and all sorts of other stuff. But you will see that Leo actually has a woman holding its tail. And that woman, to me, is very much emblematic of Virgo. And so, essentially, she's right next to Virgo as well. And that little nod is basically implying that its woman, its mother, the Queen of Heaven, she's actually in control of the lion. Kind of like what I was saying earlier. The lion or the sun is subordinate to the feminine, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. Symbolically, this is everything that I've kind of come to understand, right? Just like the strength card. The strength card illustrates this perfectly. You would think that the card with the lion on it would be proud and strong and kind of like this force to be reckoned with. But what do you actually see? You generally see a lion with its tail between its legs, and it's a woman sort of subduing him. Right, she's the one who's actually in control. So this relates to this whole entire dynamic of the lion and the sun being a child of the feminine, right? But what I was going to say is that the correspondence with bee symbolism with Virgo is super deep and interesting. So much so that I actually put several bees and a queen bee in my illustration for Virgo season. And so the other thing I just want to say how this relates is that the sort of class or family that honeybees belong to, if I'm not mistaken, their name, their like scientific name is Hymenoptera. And that means veil-winged. Veil symbolism and Virgo symbolism go completely hand in hand. And just listen to that. Hymenoptera. The hymen is actually a veil as well, right? And so there's just a lot kind of going on there. And even just the wings of bees kind of look like veils. That's why there's that correspondence. And queen symbolism, I'll just say it personally, this is my opinion, queen symbolism is essentially Virgo symbolism. So really what we have in the zodiac is we have all of the king symbolism with Leo, followed by all of the queen symbolism with Virgo, the queen of heaven, right? And so to me, that's an interesting sort of parallel with all of this stuff here. You know, the relationship between Leo and Virgo, you can't really separate the two. That in my mind, they're pretty much locked in. And there's a ton to be said about that.
So to get back to the strength card, because it's come up a few times, one of the things I noticed when you handed me your pile of strength cards to look at was the fact that majority of the time it is a woman taming the lion. But in some of the decks, it's a man taming the lion. And what I noticed was that when a woman is taming the lion, it's so much more natural and calm and gentle. And then when the man is trying to tame it, you can tell that they're illustrating that he has to use more force. And it's actually more of like a competition, which to me kind of goes along more with the female being the mother, being able to come into a situation, diffuse a situation calmly, without having to feel as though her ego needs to come into play so much to prove something that she is stronger than this lion, because that actually is more intimidating, but actually is going to cause more of a combative energy. Whereas I think a balanced, grounded mother knows, or even grounded person knows, that if you come at someone with brute force, you're going to be met with brute force probably, or it's going to become more of a conflict. Whereas as opposed to coming to them more gently and kindly, even if you have to bring up something that isn't very fun to bring up, you're going to get better results. You're probably going to get farther if you come at it calmly.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting point. And there's a number of things to riff on with that. One, force is another name for the strength card. And a lot of older strength cards literally have La Force or La Forza, something along those lines.
Yes, yes.
But essentially means force. It's my understanding, at least, right? The second thing I'll say about that is that a lot of the cards that depict men, it's not uncommon for the man to also have a weapon with him.
Yes.
A club.
Yes.
Is the most common sort of thing. And my understanding as well is that when you see a man in the strength card, generally they're depicting one of two myths. One of them would be the 12 labors of Hercules, and he fights the Nemean lion. That's the first labor that he goes through. 12 labors, 12 signs of the zodiac. Might sound familiar. And the other myth that it might be encoding is the myth of Samson in the Bible. And so there's a whole entire thing with Samson in the Bible and him fighting a lion, and that he had incredible strength. And they believe that he actually had his strength in his hair, and then his hair was basically cut. And so they thought that he was going to lose his strength. Turns out he did not lose his strength. This is a complete aside, but there's so much, actually, it's very relevant, if I'm being honest with you. Pillar symbolism also plays a big role in this card. In fact, you're going to see a handful of older strength cards where there's actually no lion, but there's a broken pillar, and that it's a woman with a broken pillar, not a lion. Sometimes the lion is in the background or what have you, but she doesn't have her hands on the jaws of a lion. So once again, just her and the pillar. There's so many myths with Leo that relate to pillar symbolism, actually. And what I was going to get into is that essentially one of the last sort of elements of the story of Samson is that he's being held prisoner, and he is chained to one or two pillars while he's being held captive, and his enemies are in the same space that he's in. And so he decides to use his brute strength and literally pull these pillars together, and then it collapses the building, and then all of his enemies, including himself, actually end up dying. And so he basically decided to destroy himself so he can destroy his enemies, right? And it's all about this strength, right? This inner strength, or this brute strength that he's associated with. And we're talking about the strength card. Well, just to kind of contextualize this a little bit, when people refer to a country that's willing to use the Samson option, that means that they're willing to destroy themselves along with the rest of the world. That's what the
Wow.
Samson option represents.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah, it's a nuclear war thing.
Ah, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So anyways, that's the Samson option right there. But yeah, I just wanted to just briefly mention this idea of the woman in the strength card with this broken pillar. The broken pillar, in my opinion, it really represents, it's almost like the masculine energy that has been neutered or tamed. Because if it were a complete pillar, that would be more of the complete phallic sort of energy. But when it's broken, that means that it's kind of been subdued in some way, shape, or form. The same way you see a subdued, submissive lion in modern versions of the strength card. The other thing as well that I just wanted to mention is that Emily mentioned the sun beyond the sun. And this is one of my favorite topics, actually. It's so interesting. It's such a potent sort of rabbit hole to dive into. And she's right. That is exactly what the sun, in quotes, in the full card represents. That's what she was talking about. It's actually not the sun that you see with your eyes. It's not the sun that rises in the east and sets in the west. It's the sun beyond the sun. So basically, it's more of a cosmic sun. It's more of a spiritual sun. And I'll just say, for me, when people refer to the black sun, people refer to the philosopher's sun. There's a few different names where the secret sun is kind of another way of putting it. They're actually talking about a central sun. They're not talking about the sun that revolves and that rises and sets every single day. It's a stationary, idle sun. So when these older mystics and sort of occultists refer to this sun beyond the sun, they're actually making a polar reference. They're actually making a reference that has more of an alignment with the world axis or axis mundi, right? It's the stationary sun, and that's what the black sun represents too. It's a stationary sun, which is in contrast to the sun that's always revolving around. It's the stationary sun that acts as the point of pivot for all things. So that's how I personally see it. So when the Fool is coming down from that mountain, he's actually coming down from a central mountain, aka a polar mountain, aka the center of all things. And so that sun is emblematic of that, basically. So her point was well taken with how she sort of represented that with the tarot. The last thing I'll say is that I think one of the first times we ever streamed with Emily, I asked her if there was a sign associated with yoga, because she's all about astro yoga. And I suggest people seek out her services. All of her links will be in the description and all of that. But I asked this question because I personally think I have a correspondence for yoga. And I think it's Leo. I think Leo is sort of the clear correspondence for yoga. Look at the nature of the cat and how they stretch and how they're very like flexible creatures. I think about the warmth of a cat. We know that cats are warmer than humans, right? And they love the warmth. They love baking out in the sun. And I think the sort of thing that sealed the deal for me is that there is an Indian deity named Narasimha, and he is an incarnation of another deity. But in this version, he is a lion-headed person, essentially. He's a humanoid lion, essentially. And if I'm not mistaken, he is actually the god of yoga. And there's a whole storyline where he actually breaks out of a pillar. He hides in a pillar to kill one of his followers' fathers. He has a follower, devotee. His father is evil. And he hides in this pillar, busts out of it. You can find illustrations and statues of him breaking out of this pillar. And then he literally disembowels the father of one of his followers, right? And I saw this statue in India where this lion is over this guy and he completely ripped his guts open and he's pulling out his entrails. And I'm like, what is going on here? And it wasn't until years later that I actually come across the mythology of all of this. So with Narasimha, you have the whole entire thing of pillar symbolism being associated with the lion. And then also it's a very classic correspondence. But the lion has also been very much associated with defeating evil. It's one or the other. Either the lion protects innocence and purity and has this fondness for virgins, and they basically fight evil, or they are a representation of evil itself. Kind of like the demiurge in a lot of ways. And so this is sort of the dual nature of solar symbolism, king symbolism. Either you have a righteous king or you have a tyrant, right? Or somewhere in between. But the line basically carries all of this symbolism as well. It's either regal and it's sort of a warrior for peace and justice and balance and all these things, or he's corrupt and has a huge ego. That's another thing perhaps that's worth bringing up. There is a major correspondence with ego symbolism as it corresponds to the sun and as it corresponds to the lion.
I was meditating on Leo last week, and one of the things that came to mind is that Leo is ruled by the sun and is best in that sun energy. And one of the reasons it likes performance is because this life incarnate is really like the drama of life, where we all put on these characters and we play these roles, and we're all part of the play of life. And that was really resonant for me.
All right. Thank you for the voicemail. That is from an anonymous caller, but we appreciate it nonetheless. And just wanted to point out what this reminds me of is just the sun going through the houses, or the sun going through these different constellations throughout the year. And so in many ways, right, if this is a solar based system, whether we're talking about Cancer, Leo, Virgo, etc. In many ways, you can say that these are all aspects of the sun. And if the sun is the point of pivot, then we're basically saying that these are all aspects of the one, right? It's 12 aspects of the one. And so to me, the sun plays all of these different roles. So whether you're talking about Scorpio and death and rebirth, or, any of the signs really, there is a solar aspect there. So I can kind of, in my mind, imagine the sun, and basically if it represents this unifying presence in whatever way, then these are its 12 expressions. And so her voicemail just reminded me of that, playing this sort of role of these different characters as it goes through these different times of year.
Yeah, I like that. And this makes me think of the world as a stage, and I really do appreciate the sentiment of that statement or that idea. And it also does make me think about how Leo, a lot of times what you'll hear about is that a person who has lots of Leo energy wants to be the center of attention. I think, too, that isn't always a bad thing, especially when you are talking about the world as a stage or a place of performance, because sometimes you need to have that courage in order to play that role, and step into a role or have the courage to actually change or realize when it's time to change. And I think that Leo energy really embodies that.
Definitely. And it kind of reminds me too, speaking of attention, and I know Georgina earlier was saying that attention goes towards Leo, not that Leo demands attention.
Right.
And I think there's something to be said about that. That's interesting. But when we're dealing with Leo, once again, we're dealing with the sun. And so we're dealing with this childlike energy. And that's why you see the child on the sun card once again. And then the line is the symbolic child in the strength card, in my opinion. And children have a lot of solar energy to them. There's so much potential with children, right? And they kind of radiate in a way that adults oftentimes do not, right? When you become an adult, the world has a way of sort of reinforcing and conditioning you, molding you, if you will. When you're a kid, you don't have that just yet. And so the childlike sort of quality of wanting the attention, hey, look at me do this, hey, look at me do that, right? It's just an innate part of childhood. You want your parents' attention, and you should receive your parents' attention and other people's attention. It's just natural, right? And so as you get older, obviously things just change. But the other thing I just want to mention as well with the sun card is oftentimes, I wouldn't say this is exclusive, but many times the sun card is pulled in a reading. I see this as a basically nudge to allow your inner child to come out. That your inner child wants to come out, your inner child wants to play, your inner child might want to be healed or in some other way integrated. And it's important to be curious, just like a child as well, right? And so I think that that's an aspect to that card that I generally see kind of come through, is your childlike kind of innocence wanting to, in some way or another, come out.
Right. And this time of year during Leo season is a great time for your inner child to be coming out, because we have great weather right now. It's sunny, it's light. Children and lots of people are on vacation, or they don't have to be working right now, depending on their occupation. And so there's this kind of relaxed sort of sense of the entire summer. But I think that this part of the summer in particular, because it does usually get hotter, so they'll call it the dog days of summer in this time. But I do think that it has something to do with that Leo energy as well.
Oh, yeah. No, definitely. And so isn't that interesting that the dog days of summer takes place during the feline sign of the zodiac?
Yeah.
And this has to do with Sirius, the heliacal rising of Sirius, the dog star, basically. Complete correspondence with that reference there. And also, too, I know it's after the summer solstice, right? But during the summer, you have longer nights. And so you're able to be out longer, and there's just less to worry about versus winter, where depending on where you live, it's frigid and it's cold and it's dangerous, and you want to be inside where it's warm. During the summer, you can be outside when it's warm.
My thoughts are on the symbology you put out the other day for the astrological sign of Leo. Thinking about the Leo head, lion's head with the serpent's body, and pertaining it to a lot of the research from Randall Carlson about comet impact theory and the Younger Dryas period of 13,000 years ago, which would have been in the age of Leo, or 26,900 years ago, which would be when the Earth was going through the precession of the equinox, moving through the sign of Leo in that Platonic month, and that something happened that caused the Younger Dryas period, which was a geological change on the Earth, where we went from an ice age to 400 feet of seawater level rise, and that there's a lot of theories and ideas about the world going through a certain amount of destruction back then, which got rid of all the megafauna. And the current theories pertaining to that is that there was a comet. And with all of the symbology around comets being, a serpent's tail, even having ties to Lucifer or the light bringer, in the sense of when a comet reaches the Earth's atmosphere or is getting closer, it's a tremendously bright light in the sky. So again, perhaps thinking of like the lion's head being the sun, or even the age of Leo, kind of both true at the same time, and then shining light, the sun almost coming in, but with this serpent's tail. I know there's a lot of symbology in China as well around witches' broomsticks actually having their origin in the tail of a comet. There's all sorts of symbology I'm sure you can dig up on the tails of comets and how much they pertain to ancient civilization, and comets being this kind of dual symbol of either something that brings a boon to humanity or destroys it. So I think there could be a lot of really interesting research there following on, and looking at the sign of Leo itself, it's almost as if it's there's a kind of circular head with a squiggle or a tail coming out the back. Perhaps that's again alluding to this comet impact theory. So yeah, there's definitely a rabbit hole to dig down there. Randall Carlson's work is really exceptional on it. Very brilliant researcher and thinker of our times. It's appeared on the Joe Rogan podcast and a few other places. But yeah, that could be a good rabbit hole to go down, and looking at the precession of the equinox and the great year and the importance of Leo and what pertains to something that could be a blessing, either the kind of disintegration of a comet that brings interesting platinum group metals and things for the environment, or something that completely destroys the surface of the world. Maybe even thoughts there in terms of the return of Aslan. Anyway, I hope that helps. Take care.
TH, thank you for that voicemail. Much appreciated. A few things I want to chew on with this one. The idea of comets and the idea of destruction is very much in play with Leo season. And so even the book Babylonian Star Lore by Gavin White, which I reference kind of often, it's kind of interesting all of the things in which he says the line was associated with, and Leo as well, when it comes to destruction and terror and war and things like that, right? The lion is known for being a formidable warrior, right? The king of the jungle, so they say. And so just the idea of destruction to me is interesting. And for some cultures, the time of Leo was a time of death as well. And it was because it was so hot that it would bring death, essentially. That, to desert peoples, the time of Leo has more of this sort of correspondence, right? And you can see how easily that would be the case. Scorching heat, everything's dry, there's no water, things are going to die, basically.
Right.
And so it brings about basically this kind of underworld dynamic, actually, because of this death correspondence. So that's just something that I wanted to put out there as kind of a basic sort of thing. And then the comet thing, and if this does sort of match up on a timeline level with the precession of the equinoxes. I think that's interesting as well. When it comes to the great ages, I just have to say, I'm not someone that puts a ton of stock into knowing exactly when these ages transitioned, or how old the earth is, or when the last flood was, or anything like that. To be honest with you, I don't even know what year it really is, because it's just one of those things where, you know, the Chinese have one idea of what year it is, the Jews have another idea of what year it is, the Gregorian calendar, that's another idea.
Right.
So to me, it's just one of these things where it's just like, I don't know, I can't really say. But that is curious, though. And one of the things I do know about comets as well is, if I'm not mistaken, the tail of a comet actually had this correspondence with hair. It was referred to as like the beard or hair of a comet. And there's a lot of hair symbolism between Leo and Virgo. I know it's so random, but it's true. And so with the Lion, you have the mane, right? It's luscious, glorious mane. And then with Virgo, there's some versions of Virgo where she has these luscious locks, you know. Also, I just have to say, this is kind of getting into the weeds here, but there are some versions of Virgo where Virgo is actually pointing somewhere in the sky. And depending on the sky map, depending how old it is, you're either going to see a void with where she's pointing, or you're going to see a wig, basically, right? A head of hair. And so this is known as Berenice's hair. It's also known as Coma Berenices. And so she's pointing at this clump of hair, or this head of hair, which to me was kind of puzzling for a while. And then I looked into it, and apparently this was the hair of a queen, and there's a whole storyline, if I'm not mistaken, with her hair. But what I think is intriguing is that before it was depicted as a head of hair, it was actually depicted as a queen holding her child. A queen sitting in her throne, holding a child in the palm of her hand. Now, you're actually going to see the queen, Queen Victoria, in front of Buckingham Palace, and she's holding a little figure in the palm of her hand as well. And there's also images of Isis kind of doing a very similar sort of thing. And so she, once again, Virgo is either pointing at a wig, a void, or a queen who's holding her child. Again, the queen holding the child, very similar to the Virgin Mary holding Christ, right? Very similar to Virgo holding the lion, holding the jaws of the lion. So I just want to put that out there as well, is that the symbolism of the Virgin Mary holding her child, her golden child, if you will, is no different than Virgo with the lion in the strength card. It's the same symbolism. You're still dealing with the Virgin, and you're still dealing with the golden sun, basically, whether it's in the form of a human boy or it's in the form of a lion, right? Very similar. There's a ton of overlap. So as he's just mentioning the comet thing, I couldn't not think of the hair correspondence, the Virgo correspondence. All of these things are kind of coming to mind. The main correspondence with the lion. So just wanted to put that out there. Even just to say, the card that corresponds with Virgo in the tarot is the Hermit, and the Hermit is well known for having a long beard as well, right? Also, just wanted to mention that in the book Rocks of Ages by Ross Ben, he talks about the Great Ages and what was happening in Egypt and the mythology that's associated with every great age. And he makes reference essentially to a celestial firestorm with Aquarius, and that this took place during the Great Age of Aquarius. But as we know, every sign has this really interesting, unique correspondence and dynamic, this unique relationship with its opposing sign, its polarity sign, right? Or its polar opposite sign. So Aquarius has this really unique relationship with Leo. And so the fact that there was what he says as celestial firewater as an occurrence during Aquarius season reminds me very much of Leo as well, fire. It's actually sort of a combination between Aquarius symbolism, the water bearer, and then Leo, which has this relationship with fire. And he basically mentions that Sekhmet, the cat goddess, also played a part in this whole entire storyline. So I think that's interesting as well, bringing in the feline symbolism with all of this. And this just reminds me of the fact that lions actually have this huge relationship with water symbolism that kind of goes unnoticed unless you've looked into it. So it's not uncommon to see lions on the sides of waterways, as an example. There's a huge aspect to lions coming out at the rising of the Nile River. There's this sort of dynamic that's at play that basically relates the lion with water. And there's even like tons of fountains where like water is coming out of the mouth of a lion, as an example, right? So there's this sort of beautiful interplay between lion and water symbolism, basically. So those are the things that TH's voicemail reminded me of. Hopefully you got something out of that. That'll do it for our voicemails today. Thank you so much to everyone who submitted something. The last thing I'll get off my chest is one of my favorite weaves with Leo, and it has to do with the fact that there is a major correspondence between feline, serpent, and dragon symbolism. So I believe Emily mentioned earlier that the strength card corresponds with Tet or Teth, which means serpent. It also means vessel as well. That's my understanding. But this serpent connection is so intriguing because when you look into feline symbolism, there's a lot of parallels with snakes, basically.
Yes.
And when you're around cats, you can kind of see the snake-like quality, especially once it's really pointed out to you. Mm-hmm. It's intriguing, right? And so the cat, of course, has a tail. It's even been said that the tail of a cat is where its true power resides. I think that's interesting. And of course, the snake is all tail, basically. The way a cat sort of moves about, it kind of slinks around and it can be sneaky and all these things. Very malleable, very flexible, not unlike a serpent, right? They like to curl up in a similar sort of way. In the case of each, there's also slit pupils. So there's some species of cat that have slit pupils. Lions actually do not have slit pupils, but like a normal house cat does. And then, of course, you have snakes that also have slit pupils as well. They both have fangs. They both hiss. And they also both strike in a very similar way. The way a serpent strikes at something and the way a cat will sort of strike at something, very similar. And so when you look into both of those creatures, serpents and felines, you'll also find out that essentially they've been used synonymously with dragons, and that dragons have kind of been used synonymously with these two as well. So in my mind, the serpent, dragon, and feline, they're really interconnected with each other in so many different ways. And I actually made a video about all of this, and it's probably one of my favorite videos that I've ever put together. And so once it's pointed out and once you notice it, you can't not notice it. And so there's something to be said about this whole entire correspondence that I think is really intriguing. And when you look at serpent symbolism, the way they move, right? It just reminds me of the curves of life. It reminds me of waveforms. It reminds me of frequency. And so to me, I can kind of see the symbolism with the life-giving properties of the sun, with what people think about the lion, with what people think about the cat as well. And then, of course, the dragon, too, is a major powerhouse sort of creature, right? And so many things have been related to the dragon. But the serpent in particular, I mean, it might be the most symbolically potent creature that we actually have on planet Earth, right? The bull has a ton of stuff going with it. Bird symbolism is really deep. There's a lot of animals that I can point at where you can just research that animal all day and all night forever. And the serpent, though, might be the king of animals that way, symbolically, because it's represented so many different things. And people have a very strong opinion about the serpent. Most sort of pantheons or most cultures either highly revere them or highly fear them. And so they've been able to occupy sort of both sides that way. And there's just a number of myths about their sort of integral part in the origin story humanity, like in the Bible. There's just so much to say about that. But I definitely wanted to get that off my chest before we wrap things up here.
And I love this as well. And when you first brought this to my attention years ago, it resonated with me so deeply because I am a cat lady and I just love cats. And so when I really was looking at this, when I really started to compare the two, it became very clear to me that so many of the things you're bringing up, I don't have to go through and repeat them all. It just really makes a lot of sense.
And before we really wrap it up here, though, because you are a cat lady through and through.
Oh, yes.
And this has to do, by the way, I think, if you guys have never heard this before, since we're talking about Leo here, there is a parasite known as toxoplasmosis that house cats have in their feces. And it's been said, there have been many studies, it's a known thing. This isn't a sort of theory or anything like that, but they have this known parasite that apparently people will inhale, and it kind of turns them into cat people. They say that this is where crazy cat ladies come from, is that they have toxoplasmosis, right? And the other thing it does for like rats and mice, this was years ago when I read this, by the way, apparently with rodents, it'll make the rodents attracted to cat urine, of all things, so that they are more easily able to be hunted by the cat. So the parasitic sort of dynamic with cats, obviously, I'll never stop being a cat guy. The toxoplasmosis thing does not bother me or whatever. I just think it's kind of an interesting curiosity. But if there's anyone who has toxoplasmosis, it is my beautiful wife here.
Guilty as charged. And I actually don't mind if I have it.
You love it. So, to wrap up the episode, just tell us a few of your favorite things about cats and why you appreciate them so much.
Yes, I love this. There's a few things that come to mind right away.
She's lighting up, by the way. I know you guys can't see this because it's a podcast, but she's all lit up over here.
Oh man, yeah, I'm like misty-eyed almost. It's sick, Yeah, well, I really love their independence, and there's something about their demeanor and their independence that really gets me because I appreciate them on so many levels, but I think the independence that they have allows them to live a lifestyle that not many other animals live. And one thing that I learned about cats a handful of years ago was the fact that, let's say there is a end of the world sort of event, and you have cats and dogs that will be involved in that because we have domesticated them, that the dog would not survive because the dog is highly dependent on their human, whereas a cat would survive because, yes, they depend on their human to feed them, but their hunting instincts are so strong that they would be able to survive if their human was no longer there and they were able to be free roaming.
Yeah, right.
And I think that to me is one of the things that I love about them so much. And just the amount of personalities that you can get. I know that any animal lover would say that about whatever animal they love, but I think that they're one of the best companions, and I find them to be better than people sometimes, depending on the people.
Oh, yeah, that's definitely true. Yeah, that's a great point. I appreciate their independence as well. You have to earn their trust.
Yes.
Dogs are very different. Dogs are very loyal. They are willing to put up with more bullshit from the owner, I think, and still really love them. Cats, way less so, because they'll take off. They'll take off, and if they don't really care for you, but there's a neighbor or a house down the street or whatever that they like more, they'll weasel their way in there. And sometimes they might have 3, 4, 5 homes that they visit, and they get treats and things like that, right? And so I do love that about them as well. What I've also heard in the same, or maybe it's a bit of a different scenario, but if an owner dies and they have animals, that the dogs will not eat the owner, but the cat will. So that's another sort of wrinkle or angle here that I don't know if that's true or not, but I have heard that that is a thing. So related to that as well, right? If a cat doesn't want to get pet, it will not get pet. Same thing with a dog, but a cat will actively avoid you. If they're not interested, there's kind of nothing that you can do to get them interested, right? And so it all just depends on their sort of temperament and everything else. And I like the kind of courtship process of getting to meet a new cat and seeing them become more comfortable with you and wanting to come around and earning their trust and everything else. But even too, once that happens, you almost are treated kind of like a servant or a slave or something like that.
Yeah.
Like they kind of run the show sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And you find yourself that you're wanting their attention and you're wanting their kind of like time and things like that. And they could kind of care less. So that makes you want them even more, right?
Yeah, they're masters at reversing the role.
Yes, they are. Exactly. So it actually does remind me a little bit of the demiurgic thing, where the demiurge thinks that he's at the very top of the hierarchy. Cats kind of have this opinion of themselves where they think they're at the top of the hierarchy, even if they're just a stray cat or something like that. So you got to love them.
You better.
Okay, guys, thank you so much for hanging out. We will see you shortly for an episode on Virgo symbolism. And I just have to say, this sign wasn't a sign that I resonated with deeply when I first got into astrology. But all of these years later, I have such a huge appreciation for it that it's definitely going to be a good one. And I have some good guests lined up to submit voicemails. And I'm really looking forward to it. So we'll see you then.
As am I, and thank you, everyone.
Okay, this concludes the live recording Michelle and I made on Sunday, July 27th. As always, a big, big thank you to everyone who submitted something, but especially Georgina Rose and Emily Ridout, our very special guests for this episode. Georgina, aka Dot Darling, has a podcast called The Pagan Perspective. Definitely check that out. She's on Patreon, Twitter, Instagram, and elsewhere as Dot Darling. That's DAAT Darling. The ever insightful Emily Ridout can be found at astroyoga.org if you're interested in her astrological or yoga services. And you will be hearing more from her in future episodes, that's for sure. Also, in case you weren't aware, I am available for tarot readings, study sessions, and symbolic birth chart readings. It's truly a pleasure to meet you all and talk symbolism. You can book on my site, symbolicstudies.com, or as always, you can text me at 503-893-4606 for more information. Also, just want to let you know that I'm available for graphic design services. In fact, that is how I found symbolism to begin with. So if your project is in need of an art director or designer, feel free and hit me up. As always, for exclusive content, head on over to patreon.com/symbolicstudies or symbolicstudies.com/secrets. I post weekly updates every weekend. Every other weekend, I post something exclusive just for supporters. As an example, this podcast is available a week early for subscribers. Without a doubt, this is the best way to keep up with everything I have to offer, and it's just $5 a month. And that's it for this episode. We'll see you next month with a show on the symbolism of Virgo. Until then.